The problem with holding a microphone is I can't clap. Maybe a snap is good enough. Let's hope so. Hi! Hi everyone. It has been over 8 months since I've uploaded a video. I haven't forgotten about you guys, but life has been a little overwhelming. So I just took a long hiatus, however you pronounce that word. But I've been thinking about this channel like all the time and just wanting to get back to it because I love talking about books with you guys. So doing my best to hop back on and really hoping that I can be a little more consistent this go around. Today, I know it's like basically already February. I mean, by the time I get this edited and uploaded, it will be February. But I just wanted to talk about my last year in books, 2023, and give a sort of year wrap up. And I know it's really late and everybody's like, who cares about 2023 anymore? But that's just what I want to talk about. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's pass more books. Sorry if this whole microphone situation looks a little bit awkward. It is what it is. So let's talk a bit about the books that I read last year. Just to give kind of a summary quickly of like my highlights. I'm not really going to talk a ton about the books that I didn't enjoy. But honestly, last year was not the best reading year for me. I had a lot of books that I just didn't love. A lot of books that like I enjoyed well enough, but I didn't find a lot of books that I loved. It was hard, and there were a few disappointments. I'm mostly just going to focus on the few books that I really, really did love, and I'm hoping for a bit of a better reading year. I think last year, I had a lot going on, and so I was struggling to read as much anyway, but this next year, I hope I can focus a bit more on some books that I've really been looking forward to. Probably my favorite read of all last year. It's at least tied for first place. It was amazing. My favorite read last year, of course, was Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. It was the year of Sanderson last year. He had his 4 secret projects, and they were all good. They were all fun, but Tress just was the magic for me. I think partly because it was the first one, and there had been so much anticipation building up to it, and I was just dying to get my hands on it, but also something about it, just like the sort of the fairy tale feel and the nostalgia that it brought associated with The Princess Bride. For some reason, like this kind of book was exactly what I needed at the time that I read it last year, and it was like the first book I read last year. And I read it so fast, I could hardly put it down, and I just loved it. Let me give you just a quick synopsis. This book follows a girl named Tress. Her name is really like Glorg or something like that, but everyone calls her Tress because of her hair. She lives on a rock in the middle of a sea, but the sea is not made of water. It's made out of these like tiny grains of like, they're pores, spores. And when the spores do get wet, they basically like explode into things. And there's a few different kinds of spores in this world that create these different oceans. And Tress's ocean, specifically the spores, like burst into vines, and it's dangerous, really dangerous to just have something like suddenly explode when it gets wet. It's pretty dangerous to sail. People do sail. I know it sounds like you can't really sail in like sand, but there's cool science behind why it works and why the sand actually moves like water. It's cool. Anyway, Tress is living her life. She's fallen in love with this boy on her little island, and he loves her. They're really cute. And then he ends up getting like captured at sea, and she has this kind of buttercup moment where she's like devastated, but then instead of being like Buttercup in The Princess Bride, where she just kind of mourns him and kind of lets the story take her where it goes, she decides, I'm gonna go after him and I'm gonna find him and I'm gonna bring him home. It's an amazing adventure with great characters, fun magic. I also really, really loved the prose of this one because it's a certain character in the Cosmere telling the story, and it's just so fun to have a very different artistic narrative style. For those who know, it's Hoyd who's narrating it. What's interesting is I actually preferred this narrative to the way that Hoyd narrated the Yumi book, the third secret project. I don't know, for some reason I just felt like it was executed better in this book, and I feel like I've heard a few opinions that they thought like that Yumi had the better narrative, but I really, for some reason, overall I preferred this narrative better. I just thought it was stronger. I don't know. I'm planning to reread it this year. It's just sometime this year I hope to reread it, especially because when I read this, I read the ebook version because the physical copies did not come right away, which was fine. It was understandable. They just took a while to print. So I'm really excited to reread it with the physical copy, and I'd really enjoy the artwork and the design. Also, really fun thing, I got to go to Dragonsteel this year, the Dragonsteel Con, which was really, really fun. And I won like a free Lightning signing. So he signed this book for me. And then I got Howard Lyon, who was there at the con as well. He's the illustrator for this. And he signed my book for me too. And it brings me so much joy. Let me open it up real quick and show you. I think it's so cool. That was probably one of my favorite reads. The next read that was one of my top favorites is actually probably my most controversial to me book on this. Like, it's not controversial to you guys. It's just like, to me, it's like I mostly loved it, but I have a few issues. I read Gilded by Marissa Meyer near the beginning of last year as well. And Marissa is one of my favorite authors. Like, she's in my top 5. And I used to think that she could do no wrong in her books. Like, I love her Cinder series. Like, it's basically perfect. I mean, granted, I don't love her one, like, in-between book. What's it called? Fairest? Like, meh. And okay, now that I'm thinking about it, there's a couple of her books that I don't love. Like Heartless. But, like, her Renegade series is, like, perfection. And her book Instant Karma, that's a really fun romance, and I'm picky with my romance, but it was really, really good. And Gilded was really, really good. Except, like, near the end. Okay, let me tell you what it's about first. So, Gilded is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. It's so fun because you can tell the world building is so inspired by German culture, like Rumpelstiltskin is from. And the world building feels so rich. There's these gods who interact with the humans and grant wishes, and there's these evil creatures that are like, there's like this, what's he called, like an elf king. Oh, he's like the Erlkönig is what he's called. Sorry, my German's a little rusty. But there's this like evil king who goes and like hunts at night, and he like steals children for his wife who wants to have a child, but then she ends up like murdering it before it really grows up. And anyway, so there's like really messed up like godlike creatures and things, and there's like mythical beasts like unicorns and griffins and things like that. That's like the kind of world, and it's so rich and so cool. And then our main character, Cyrilda, she is a miller's daughter, but she's been blessed by a certain god who she like bears like their mark in her eyes. And everybody, like, it's like the god of luck, basically. Basically, everybody sees her as unlucky because of this god she's associated with. And so she's kind of an outcast in her little village. But her connection to this god kind of compels her to lie and like tell stories, like fanciful stories. And it's always like just these crazy, like it sounds like a myth that she just like made up. And what's really, really interesting is as she like is always telling these stories and really like making up whatever, and she's like just lying basically, you start to realize that she's actually like telling the truth, that she just had no way of knowing that it was the truth. And so it's a very like interesting power that she has. And of course she ends up encountering this Earl King. She ends up encountering him, you know, of course, basically makes up this lie that she can spin straw into gold, and of course he takes her away to do it for him. And then when she's like in his castle, she encounters this poltergeist who actually does have the ability to turn straw into gold. You guessed it, he's Rumpelstiltskin. But of course, we don't know his name, and there turns out to be a lot more to him, and he's not like the vengeful Rumpelstiltskin that you remember from like the stories. He's actually a good guy. And so he and Serilda kind of strike up this unlikely friendship and are trying to work together, and everything is really hindering them. It's messy. It's really, really good. It really is. And it's just such a fresh take on this fairy tale. And again, the world building is just so engrossing, and I feel like it's so well written, and I like Serilda's character. I think her like ability with like her lying storytelling, which turns out to be like basically prophesying and telling the truth. Like, it's really, really interesting and fascinating. There are lots of great things I love about this. The problem for me is at the end of the book relies really heavily on this trope that I really struggle with. It's like a miscommunication. It's like that trope where you're like, I'm not going to tell you this really important thing that you have every right to know because it's like very important information that really concerns you. But I'm not going to tell you because I'm protecting you, and I feel bad and too guilty to tell you. And there's not actually a good reason to not tell the person about this really, really important thing that they have every right to know, and you just don't tell them because of reasons. Anyway, so that was like really heavy at play at the end of the book, and that bugged me so much. And so I was really worried at the end of the book because I was like, great, is the next book going to be able to recover from that, or is it going to kind of flop? So unfortunately, the second book in this series, Cursed, which I left on my bookshelf, I feel like it was, again, good writing and the same world building and great characters that had already kind of been established in book one. But there were things about the plot that I didn't love, especially with like the miscommunication trope being at play. And just overall, I felt like it was weaker. It was a less satisfying ending. There were lots of satisfying things, of course, that did happen, and ways that certain things were resolved. But it was overall a disappointing book. And I've also got to say, the ending of that book was so cheesy, in my opinion. Like, so cheesy. But I did have a really good time reading this book, and it was good enough that I felt like I should include it in my top books, because I really did have such a good time reading this until basically the end. And unfortunately, the second book was a disappointment, but what can you do? There's still a lot of good things about it. Okay, my next favorite book from last year is the one that I think is really like tied for first place with Tress, because it was just amazing. Like, oh my word. It's this giant book, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. It's so good. It's so good. So this book takes place in the Regency era, like literally the Napoleonic Wars are going on. So it's like in England during that time. Basically, magic is like a real thing in this world, and it's just not really been like actively practiced for a long time, like probably centuries. But there are still gentlemen magicians who are basically like philosophers of magic. Like, they just talk about magic and theorize about it and read about it, and they just study it. And so it's the kind of occupation for like really, really rich people who don't actually have to work, and they just call themselves magicians because they get together and talk about magic. And two of these gentlemen magicians are like, why don't we actually practice magic? Like, why did we stop? Like, why has it been so long? And they end up running into this other magician who's like, well, I practice magic. And they're like, say what? No one has practiced magic in centuries. And he's like, yeah, I do. I'll prove it to you. And so he gathers this group of gentlemen magicians together and like brings these statues to life in front of them. And they're like, oh my goodness, yeah, you're a magician. And things go on from there. And basically he and another magician are prophesied to bring magic back to England and do a lot of cool things. And that's really just scratching the surface. There is so much to this book. There are lots of characters, lots of things going on. There's these crazy fairies who they're not really friendly to humans, and they don't really understand how humans work, and so they'll just kind of want to play with them, and they're doing these kind of horrendous things to them and just thinking that it's okay and that they're kind of just playing around. And it's a really interesting take on how fairies are and like the real like dark side of fairies, you know. And the magic in this book is really, it's technically a hard magic system because there are like all these like books and rules and like certain ways that you do things, but it comes across the way you read it as a soft magic system because it's just always full of wonder and you don't know exactly what magic can do, and it's just kind of like unfolding before you in a really wondrous way. So it's like technically a hard magic system that reads like a soft magic system, and I think it's so well done. The other thing that I love about this book, well, there's a lot of things I love about it, but the prose is just so true to the time period. Like it's really styled after that kind of like classical writing of Jane Austen or Elizabeth Gaskell or their contemporaries, and it really sounds like the time, even down to a lot of the grammar and punctuation that they use, which I love to geek out and nerd out about. If you know me at all, you know that's what I do. It's also so fun because there's all these footnotes in it that just really add to the depth, and sometimes the footnotes just contain these like side stories that are really, really interesting, and it's just so well done. This book is not necessarily for everybody because not everybody loves that kind of style of writing, and it's also really, really long, and not everybody loves a long book. But I think if you're interested at all in this time period, in seeing magic incorporated into it, you need to give it a try because it really, in so many ways, I mean, there are so many times that I laughed out loud. It's clever, it's witty, and it's just amazing. And you also, you really do grow to love the characters so much and hate other characters so much. Like there were certain characters like Stephen, is that his name? And then Jonathan Strange and Arabella. Like I think those are the characters who I probably cared about the most and who I was always kind of rooting for. But there's just so many characters in there who you really just love and you're rooting for, and other characters like Mr. Norrell who drive you crazy even though they're technically good guys, and you're just like, no. And then there's like the fairies. Oh, it's such a good ride. Something I would probably recommend, there's like 3 parts to this, and something that I would probably recommend if you are going to potentially struggle with reading this book. I didn't read it like all in one go, and I was reading other books at the same time, so I would suggest for most people probably what will make reading this book a little bit easier is to read part 1 and then read another book to kind of like cleanse your palate and then read part 2 and then again read another book and kind of like give yourself a break and then read part 3. And if you can just pace yourself that way, I think it makes it a little more manageable and keeps you like engaged so you don't ever like feel burnt out. And to be clear, I didn't quite structure my reading that way. I was just reading other books at the same time as well and picking this up as much as I could, and I never felt bored. I never was like, oh, don't want to pick up that book right now. Like I loved it the whole time, but it is a lot, and so I think it can help to just tell yourself, I just gotta focus on part 1 right now and then give yourself a break, and I think that structure helps. The next book on my list is Defiant by Brandon Sanderson, another Sanderson book. It was a really good year for Sanderson because, I actually realized that I got 5, 6, 7, technically 8 books from Sanderson last year, like bought and got on my shelf, which is very not typical. And obviously I bought a couple books that he didn't actually publish this year, but I got all 5 books that he released this year. Technically 6 because there was that like really short one that was in the last Sanderson box, plus a couple others that he had published before. And it's not normal like for me to get that many books from him this year. So I'm a little Sanderson heavy this year, as I'm sure a lot of other people are. Sorry if you're not a Sanderson fan. I'm not like the biggest Skyward fan out there, but I did really, really enjoy Skyward, and I liked Starsight and Cytonic a lot too. I don't know, they weren't like amazing because it's a little bit jarring to go to such different scenarios and have a totally different cast of characters with each of those books. But I mean, I still enjoyed them overall. Defiant, I really do think it's a great conclusion because it really does tie all the other books together so well. I did read the novellas that come between Cytonic and Defiant that Jancy Patterson co-wrote with Sanderson, and I thought those were excellent and really helpful to read before reading Defiant. So if you're interested in this series and you haven't finished it, I would suggest reading the novellas first, even if you don't love them. I think they were great. I think they were excellent. But even if you don't love them, like, I think they really do help give better context than just reading Defiant alone does. Because Defiant does give good context for everything that happens in between, but it's still, I think it would be a little bit trickier to really dive into Defiant without reading those novellas. So that's my take on that. But really, Defiant was so great with amazing themes, characters, action. Just a couple quick thoughts that are kind of spoilery. Basically, I struggled a little bit with Spence's connection to Chet throughout the book. It just didn't really vibe for me very much, and it didn't work for the majority of the book for me. So I was kind of glad when they kind of separated at the end. But the other thing that I've got to say that I just loved about this book was the way that certain species would look at other species and accept them. And I'm talking specifically about like the slugs. The slugs would look at people like Spensa and her team, and they would visualize them as like bigger slugs. and Spensa would kind of like see the slug's image of her and be like, that's kind of creepy, but also kind of cool. You know, but it was just like the slugs being like, I recognize you as like one of us, even though you're obviously like a human. Like I accept you as, you know, another being who's worthy of love and respect and my loyalty. And it was just such a cute way that the slugs looked at things. And this is a huge spoiler, okay? So if you don't want any spoilers for the end of Defiant, skip ahead. But I just adored how near the end, when the slugs and the delvers are coming together, and the slugs see the delvers as these giant slugs, and they're like, yeah, we get it, you're people too. and then once the delvers kind of like accept the slugs as being like alive and like worthy of life and happiness and love and all that, then they realize that like someone else is trying to kill them, and they're like, someone is hurting the little delvers. And that was probably my favorite line of the whole book, how the delvers then to accept other people like saw them as like a form of a delver, and just this pattern of like these creatures like saying, okay, I see that we are the same on a basic level, even though there are lots of differences. Just recognizing this like little sliver of like there is something the same between us. And I just loved this metaphor that was explored through that, and there's kind of this great humor in it too, of course, but I just thought that it was such a great theme that was explored, and something that I believe strongly that really we're all slugs, or we're all delvers, or we're just all we're all people who really deserve love and respect. And if we can all see each other that way, we can avoid a lot of pain and wars and unfairness, you know? So I just really loved how that theme was explored in Defiant. And I did tell you it was a bit of a hard reading year for me, so there were other books that like I did enjoy okay, but my last book is going to be yet another Sanderson book. I guess he just was at the top of my list this year. I don't know. So I got Arcanum Unbounded for Christmas from my husband. I had already read a lot of what was in here, but the one thing that I hadn't read that I'd had a hard time getting hold of was The Emperor's Soul. And so I got to read that for the first time, and wow, I really loved it. It was really excellent, and I can see why Sanderson recommends that as a potential entry point into the Cosmere, because it's a very interesting magic system, great characters, and I really, really love how the main character is just so aware of what makes people tick. It's just so interesting to see her insights and how well she understands people. And in a way, she can be manipulative, but in another way, she can also be incredibly understanding and compassionate. I guess I should probably give you like a summary of what it's about before I start talking about what I liked about it. Sorry. So the Emperor's Soul is about a woman who has the ability to soul stamp, and it's a magic system where basically you carve out a stamp, and the different intricate carvings basically can rewrite an object, and it has to be done in a very specific way, but you could, turn a table into a different version of that table, or make a copy of something, depending on how you do it. But you have to have a very deep understanding of the history of that object and the nature of it, so that you can kind of rewrite it. She's been captured by some authorities who, it's like in a country that kind of sees this soul stamping iffy, how they see it. They're not very charitable towards it. They kind of have mixed emotions, and they don't always see it as a morally good thing, especially because she knows how to create soul stamps that can work on people, which is very, very complicated, like way more complicated than on like an actual object. But it's theoretically possible to make some changes to a person with a soul stamp too. And so there's this problem because the Emperor has been attacked. It was an assassination attempt, and they barely saved his life. But unfortunately, because of the injury he received, his brain is basically dead. And so he's been miraculously saved by their magic and technology, his body, but his brain is like basically gone. These authority figures, they decide to go to this woman, and now I can't even remember. I should probably look up her name. Shy. So they go to Shy because she can soul stamp, and they say, hey, we want you to create a soul stamp for the Emperor to turn him as much as you can back into just his original self, so that he can function and keep ruling this empire. And she's like, that's kind of impossible, but I will do it so that you don't kill me. And she's like making plans to escape the whole time too. So it's very, very interesting. She's trying to learn everything possible that she can about the Emperor to recreate his personality and put it into him. It's not a super long book either. Arcanum Unbounded is pretty long, but The Emperor's Soul is more like a novella. So it's not super long, but really, really great read, and I would definitely encourage you to get your hands on a copy and read it, because I think it's fantastic. So there you go. Those were the highlights of my last year, some of my favorite books. That was my 2023. I know, again, this video is late, but I would love to hear about any of your favorites from last year, or if you've read any of these books that I talked about today, what you liked, anything that you maybe didn't like as much as me, or any books that you were actually really looking forward to reading in 2024. So let me know, and let's pass more books.